amplitude is 3.
I don't know if the power right. Probably did.
It did. It did. How do we find the period?
2 pi over b, which is the thing with the x.
2 pi divided by the coefficient of x. Okay, but then we have a problem here. It's a negative on our x.
It'll just reflect it.
So that would reflect it over
The y.
the y-axis, which then kind of all the stuff we're doing is a little bit out the window. It would require a lot more work. The other thing we could use is yesterday we said that sine was,
Sine of negative x equals sine of x, right?
sine was an odd function, which meant if you had a negative on the angle, it gave you the opposite y value. So because sine is odd, we can essentially just factor out that negative. Now that would not always work, only because sine is odd. So I can rewrite this as a negative 3 sine. X over 2 is the same as 1/2 x. Now if that had been a cosine, cosine is even. What would we have to do with the negative then?
You just have to deal with it. Or
What did we write down about cosine?
if it's negative, say negative.
If it's cosine of negative x equals
Negative cosine.
positive cosine of x.
You don't have to do anything to it.
So if it were a cosine, we can just drop that negative because it's symmetric on both sides of the axis. But because it's a sine and sine is odd, we take out our negative. Now what does the negative on the outside do?
We make it
Flip it.
over the x.
Okay, so my period is 2 pi divided by the number in front of x. And my number in front of x is 1/2. So 2 pi divided by 1/2 is
4.
4 pi. Count by, every time is just our period divided by 4 because of the 4 quadrants. And we get pi. So our graph. Period is always 2 pi divided by the coefficient of x. So we had a 1/2 x, so we did 2 over 1/2. And then count by is to get the points on the x-axis. So my period tells me between 0 and 4 pi, I'm going to get an entire cycle of this graph. But we need more points than that. We want all of our quadrant breaks, so we divide our period by 4 for the 4 quadrants. So period is 2 pi divided by the number. Count by is period divided by 4. So we are counting by pi. So my first point is at pi. If I add pi, then it would be 2 pi. 3 pi. And 4 pi. Alright, my amplitude is 3. So my high point happens at positive 3. My low point happens at negative 3. We are graphing sine. Where does sine begin?
0.
At 0. And then it goes up to our amplitude. But because our graph is flipped,
It goes down.
it will go down. So at pi will be at negative 3. Back to 0. Up to positive 3 and back to 0. A lot of times I'll just ask you for 1 period, but I did ask for 2 on this. How do we get 2 periods?
Just keep going.
Keep going. We need 4 more points. We're counting by pi. So 5 pi, 6 pi, 7 pi, 8 pi. So our graph will look like that. Remember, kind of make sure your graph is curved. No zigzags, no corners, no breaks in our graph. It's a nice, smooth, continuous curve.
This is all we have to do if you have a question like this, is just graph it like that.
Alright. I want to see if we can look at a graph and write an equation that would go with it.
Y definitely equals 2.
Alright. So, kind of, watch your language.
Oh, my bad.
What is our amplitude of this graph?
2.
So, we know we'll have a 2 in front. Is this a sine or a cosine graph?
Cosine.
Sine has to start in the middle. Cosine starts at its higher low point, so we know it's cosine. But cosine should start up high. So what would make it start down low? Now, what is the period of this graph?
It's before pi.
So think about how we get period. We do 2 pi divided by the number in front of x, and it equals our period. So I'm trying to solve for that number. Divide by 4 pi. And we get 1/2. So it's -2 cosine of 1/2 x.
You just do x over 2 for that.
This one.
Someone doesn't have a very straight graph.
Yes, sorry.
No, I don't. No, I'm not. I'm just saying whoever did it did a bad example of a very smooth, not pointed graph. Do we need to write down that equation? No, never mind. That's right. I already written it down.
Okay. We good? Alright, so for this one, how many periods did I graph here? 2 periods. So we need to look just for the first period. What is the amplitude of this graph? Okay, the period, how long did it take before we started repeating? Okay, is this sine or cosine?
Cosine. Or sine starts 0.
Sine, because it starts in the middle. So -2 is 4, so it would be a 4. Did we flip this time?
No.
So just a 4 sine. Okay, so for our angle, we know period is found by doing 2 pi divided by the number in front of x. And that had to equal pi. And multiply with b divided by pi.
B is 2.
B is 2. So it's 4 sine of 2x. Alright, so if you're asked to write the equation, you have to kind of work backwards. Decide is it sine or cosine. Look at your amplitude and period and get your equation from there.
So what is it called? 2 pi. When we're doing 2 pi over b, what are we trying to find?
The period.
Period.
Alright. Technically, that is the end of this first section. I am also going to teach part of the next section today because you don't need a full class period to work on the homework from yesterday. So do you guys want to practice some of these first, or you want me to teach my next part first?
Just teach it.
Just teach what I need to teach, and then you'll have time to work on homework after that. So we will not finish this section today. I'm starting it, and then I will finish this one tomorrow. I really needed 3 days to do 2 sections. So we are going to continue talking about sine and cosine, but we're going to start with some other translations of these graphs. Just like when we did transformations in college algebra. We know we can stretch and shrink, we can flip our graphs, we already did that, but can't we also move them left, right, up, and down? So that's the next piece. So with these, if I said, there's a definition, a phase shift is moving a trig function left or right. So it may not just start at 0 and end at our period anymore if we start moving things left and right. When we find the phase shift, to me, it is way easier to do it without like the whole transformations of parent functions, because then you just have so many points on your graph. So what I do is I'm going to add an extra piece to our list of information. We're going to set up an interval as well. So all the same things that we were doing. Amplitude. What is the amplitude? Period. How do we find period?
2 pi over the amplitude.
2 pi divided by the coefficient of x, which is 1, so my period is 2 pi. Count by. How do we find that?
What's your
Period.
Divided by 4.
So we get pi over 2. Okay. But when you add something to your x, that moves the whole graph to the left. So we aren't going to start at 0. We have to start off to the left. The easiest way to do this is to set up an interval. So the interval piece, you can do it on every problem, but it's required if you have something added or subtracted to your x. And we are going to set it up between 0 and 2 pi, because that's your normal sine and cosine are between 0 and 2 pi. And you put your argument in the middle. Now we want to solve for x. So what would we have to do? Just subtract 3 pi over 4 from everything. So my interval will be from negative 3 pi over 4, less than or equal to x, less than or equal to. If you get something ugly, just leave off the pi's, 2 minus 3/4. This is like 8 over 4 minus 3 over 4.
Maybe.
Okay. So my period is no longer necessarily my stopping point. It's the distance from where we start to stop. So because I'm starting at negative 3 pi over 4, it will take me until 5 pi over 4 to get a positive 2 pi. That's the length between them. Then our setup is very similar after that. I only asked for one period on this one. So we draw our graph. Okay, my amplitude was 1. Okay, my period and count by, I'm going to come back to that in a second. I need to look at my interval. I am starting my graph at negative 3 pi over 4. So that will be over here.
There's going to be another number that goes between there.
So how do we get the next number?
Oh, and your
We add the count by. So we're taking negative 3 pi over 4 plus pi over 2. Okay, or this is like 2 over 4, so negative 3 over 4 plus 2 over 4 is negative 1 over 4, so negative pi over 4. How many points do we need total?
4.
We always do 5, because
So
we start and stop at the same spot. Okay, so we're at negative pi over 4. You add your count by, so plus pi over 2, or 2 pi over 4, and that would take us to. So remember, these should be evenly spaced to the best best of your ability. So now we're at pi over 4, so we add our count by. So plus 2 pi over 4 would be 3 pi over 4. 3 pi over 4 plus pi over 4
Okay.
is 5 pi over 4. Have we seen that number before?
That's the period.
Yeah, that was where we said our interval should stop. Okay, so the distance between those is 2 pi, but we had to shift all of our points to the left because we were adding something to our x. These points on the x-axis, those are the values. Now we have to think we are graphing sine. So where does sine begin? Okay, so at my first point we're at the middle. And then what does sine do?
Goes up.
So at negative pi over 4 we're up at positive 1. 0 was not one of my points, so I'm skipping over that. So at pi over 4 is down to 0. 3 pi over 4 is negative 1. 5 pi over 4 you're back to 0.
My line's going through the middle.
Yeah, that happens. Is this okay? Let's do another one of these. Let's do this one. I want cosine.
I'm gonna go right this time.
So we start with all of our information. What is the amplitude?
-2. That's your positive, so it's 2.
Amplitude has to be positive, but the negative tells me what? Flip the graph. So we know cosine should look like that, but it's going to be flip this time, so it's going to look like this. Okay, period. 2 pi divided by the number in front of x, which is just a 1, so a period is 2 pi. Count by. Period divided by 4. For the 4 quadrants, we get pi over 2. We have to do an interval. Why?
Going left and right.
Right. So we set it up between 0 and 2 pi, because that's where our graph normally starts and stops. And you just put your argument in the middle. So now if you wanted to solve for x, what would you do?
Pi over 2.
Pi over 3 less than or equal to x. 2 is like 6 over 3 plus 1 over 3 would be 7 over 3. Amplitude is 2. High point positive 2, low point negative 2. Interval. My first point is going to be at pi over 3, like 60 degrees. And then to get the next one, we are going to add pi over 2. So pi over 3 plus pi over 2. 1/3 plus 1/2. 5, 6.
I just do it.
Okay, we need 5 total points. So, plus pi over 2, plus pi over 2, plus pi over 2. Does everyone know how I got these points on the x-axis? 7 pi over 3 is the last one. And we noticed that was where we said our interval should end. If those don't match, you messed up somewhere. Okay, go back and figure out where. So, cosine should start at its high point. We are beginning our graph at pi over 3. Cosine should start up here, but we
Flip it.
flipped, so it's actually down here. And it goes to 0, up to 2, back to 0, and down to 2. And remember, the graph doesn't just like start and stop here. This is just one period. It's not even the only possible period. It's just one nice point for us to get. Okay, and if I ask you to keep going, this graph just keeps repeating itself in both directions.
I finally figured out how to make this graph bendy, so I don't have to use that to pretend like there's more points to go find.
Yeah. It helps to like, you'll learn how to space things so that, because if they're too far apart, it's hard
I
to
look
make
at it and
good.
I'm like, well, I just have to redraw it when I graph it. I have to redraw where my point should be.
All right, we're going to do one final problem for today. Any questions on this one? So last problem of the day.
Sorry, that was dramatic of me.
So amplitude. Period. 2 pi divided by the coefficient of x, which is 2. We get pi. Count by period divided by 4.
It's only guessing. I'm like, what is it gonna be? Yeah, sorry, I got distracted.
Interval. We set it up between what and what?
0 and 2.
And what goes in the middle?
0 and 2.
So to solve for x, we have to first add pi to everything. We get pi less than or equal to 2x, less than or equal to 3 pi. Then, so our graph will start at pi over 2 and end at 3 pi over 2. Now, that's not the true graph starting and stopping there. That just means one period could start and stop there.
If we have to add pi, we just add 1.
So, first point is at the beginning of your interval, which is pi over 2. That's like 90 degrees. We're adding pi over 4, which is like half that. So 5 points total. So pi over 2 plus pi over 4. So it's like 2 over 4 plus 1 over 4 is 3 over 4. Plus 1 over 4 would be 4 over 4, just pi. Plus 1 over 4 would be 5 pi over 4. Plus 1 over 4 is 6 pi over 4, or 3 pi over 2. Okay. Amplitude is 3 halves. That's like 1.5. We are graphing cosine. Cosine starts at its high point. So at pi over 2, we should be at 1.5. Then it comes down to 0, goes down to negative 1.5, back to 0, and positive. That's one period, but my direction said 2. So we need 4 more points. We're still adding pi over 4. So we're at 6 over 4, so 7 over 4, 8 over 4, 2 pi, 9 over 4, 10 over 4, or 5 pi over 2. And we just keep following our path.
wear my graph drawing license.
Okay, so yesterday I gave you some problems, page 143. 1 through 12, those were all matching. 21, 25, 29, and 33. Those are drawing graphs. I think your directions on some of them, the first couple it says draw between negative 2 pi and positive 2 pi. You don't have to do that, just do 2 periods on those. And then the last two on that from yesterday were writing equations. I'm going to add a couple. So this part you definitely have done tomorrow. I'm also going to give you the beginning of the homework for the next section. We won't turn it in. This one will be due on Friday because I will finish the section and I'm going to add problems to it tomorrow. But you are ready to do the first questions are just asking like amplitude, period, intervals, so you're only drawing graphs on some of them. I will allow, I think the directions say 2 period, but 1 period is okay. So if you want to do 2, you can, but if you feel confident that